Today's guest, Leslie Kivit.
Basically making sure that the interviewer experience is always similar, right? So that interviewers are basically trained, right, on the way how they ask questions, on the answers that they can expect, and that these answers are also ranked internally, right, of how good looks like, right? This is how, if the answer is something like this, then the candidate is likely going to be excellent. If the answer is like this, the candidate is likely going to be, not so good, or you might want to ask a follow-up question. And that's a practice I have not really seen anywhere else, where they have very extensive, question libraries, where hiring managers are really in control also of sort of the type of questions they want to ask, while not actively, participating in the recruiting process itself, right? They're there as a bar raiser, or, as someone basically to keep an eye on the process, but they're not often, the person that's going to interview that, the person on what is it, on personal ability or whatsoever. And that's, removing that bias from the interviewer side from a process was a real eye opener on how you can do really, really good interviews, for your company. And that's an experience that I basically took along to the other startups that I basically helped after, because, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make as a startup, and which one is also very expensive, is by hiring the wrong people, right? And specifically, if you're going to make those key hires in your second, third, or fourth wave of hiring, these hires are super, super expensive, if they go wrong. And what they do extremely well, I think, at least at Meta, is trying to minimize this error basically to a minimum.
Leslie Kivit, who is doing interim CHO, CPO work, and was a freelancer a long time ago, working for Rocket Internet back then Meta, then Home24, Sennder. So a lot of exciting companies, and did it as employee, but also as manager, executive director, and as an interim manager. And we talked a lot of about a lot of learning stories about his time back then. So every freelancer that wants to go down the interim director, manager, executive role, that's something really interesting for you. See you.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Today we have Leslie Kivit on the show. We know, I think, from 4 or 5 years ago, where I was in Amsterdam at a sourcing recruiting event, and where you were present still, I think back then still doing recruiting sourcing for Oculus in Zurich or so, I guess, right?
Yeah.
That was for me something wow, because I was just in the middle of my career as an employee and a recruiter, and really was excited about, okay, how does the next company stage look like? And I was out there flying through Europe gathering information. And this was really valuable for me to just have a conversation with you, because it was something I've never done before. Speaking with somebody from Meta in recruitment, it was really interesting, right? Now we have you here a few years later, and I'm looking forward to talk about social engineering in talent acquisition, and also about freelancing. And maybe we start, Leslie, by you giving us a bit of a story to yourself, and then we dive into the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Also thank you so much for inviting me over. And actually really excited to walk you through those two topics. So yeah, something personal, I guess. So I'm actually born and raised in Holland. I'm originally actually from a city called Rotterdam. And I actually come from a family where, they never really moved out of the city. They always stayed inside of the city. All my friends actually did the same. And I wanted to do, something else, I guess, and all my friends and, I guess also some of my family members were doing. I was doing a business degree also back then, obviously, nearby home, also in Rotterdam. And they offered doing an abroad internship. So I did my abroad internship basically in China. So I went to Shanghai for half a year. Leaving, Holland behind, and doing something in HR for the very first time. And this is basically where I realized that working with people, but working with people towards a certain, business sort of purpose is something that really, sort of excited me. And, when I came back from China, I was actually, trying to find a role. I think it was, back then it was an economical crisis and whatnot. And I think this is just a funny thing to mention also as part of an intro. And you will probably also recognize, how old I am, is that this was still the time where you were able to smoke in the office. So I applied at the role. And so they basically said, we won't be paying you, but if you work here for 3 months, then we will pay your holiday to, to Curacao, which is it's like a Dutch island in the, in the Antilles. And I remember I came there in the office, and there was this guy like sitting by this like big oak brown, desk, and he was smoking, behind his desk while actually searching, Monster board at the time. So that was actually my introduction to recruiting sort of as a whole. So I sourced there on, Monster board and some of these, dark shelves job boards at the time. And it's when I learned, Boolean, and knew that, recruiting was something that I, would actually enjoy. So later on, developed my career into, recruiting, went from agency to, to booking.com. So learned a lot actually at booking.com. It was the first organization that I joined. It was going through like a massive hypergrowth. I was hired there to, build the graduate program, in Amsterdam from the ground up. We did about 200 hires in our first year and a half, which was, quite impactful. 90% of those folks actually converted. And why do I still remember these numbers? Because it's the first company I worked for that was so data driven. There was a CTO at the time. I think his name was Brendan Banks, who was so hard on, providing numbers and, funnels and you name it. And it was up to that point was not really interesting. But, when I worked there, I was just being held responsible basically for doing that stuff.
I think, but that's important early on that you have somebody really shaping very, I would say, general truths about business principles. Like one is being data driven that are always positive, right? And value adding. So I think having this early on that's shaping your career is then laying the foundation of a fast trajectory of the career, or also just enabling growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was an engineer, right? So it was funny. It was not really someone from recruiting that said, "Hey, this is important." It was our CTO that said it. And, I guess it's cool to see like how those worlds can actually merge and how you can learn from one another. Then sometimes being a bit more empathic, I guess. And, recruiting at the time, becoming more data driven. So, my time at Booking ended, learned something about this phenomenon, which is called, startups. So basically got an offer from Rocket Internet to join their ship and help build startups, right? Like HelloFresh and Delivery Hero and whatnot. And so basically became the director of TA there. Really learned how to hustle. It's an ugly word nowadays. I also think it's an ugly word, right? So let's just, change it for working hard. But I really learned what working hard means, and, making an, impact also really means. And, so worked very closely actually with Alexander Kuglich and with Oliver Somewhere, learned a lot about how to build a business and entrepreneurship and whatnot. And I think that fueled that sort of initial fire in me of like, not always following like the already existing path of being a rebel every now and then. And because I think that's what you need to be also when you're a founder. And I remember that at that point, also Rocket Internet also decided to change their, the organization, right? They moved from being this very large, sort of venture capital arm and becoming more of, smaller office basically. And that was also the time for me basically to move. Then actually started my first freelance actually gig, and we will talk about it a little bit later. But at my first freelance assignment with Catch Your Guide, at the time, and then basically had a couple of more at Home 24, and then also at Door to Door. And I really liked the freelancing stuff because it allowed me to see a lot of companies within a short span of time. And if I have to be honest, I think also your priorities are, when you're that early in your career, are a bit different. I found it important, obviously, to see a lot of organizations, but at the same time, to be honest, I also just wanted to make money as well. And I think freelancing is a great opportunity to also build revenue and whatnot.
I think that's really true, because for me, this is also really, really outstanding. I just wanted to summarize one thing, what I think is really important when you think of it as a listener. First of all, I think that it makes fun, and that it's like, as you said, really rewarding financially, but also from the experience you get. You at first need to really develop a skill. And I think having there a solid in-house experience in recruitment, especially at companies that did recruiting really sophisticated or ambitious, I would say, that's maybe already enough and a good foundation. And if you then also are very scrappy, pragmatic in the way you work and good in communication, hey, it's really great to start freelancing, because you maybe can earn double or triple of what you can earn as an employee if you do it right. And also get way more exposure into environments that are currently going crazy, because this is where usually a lot of freelancers are also necessary, right? So that was just a short thing I wanted to highlight as well, additionally.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. And, I also just constantly wanted to challenge myself, right? So I think also Get Your Guide was going through hyper growth. Home24 was getting through hyper growth, and being able to be part of these environments was something that, at least at the time, I found, extremely exciting. I think like the values, right, that I had in work, did change, and I think we can talk about it a little bit later. But at that time, gathering that experience, high growth organizations was something that I found important. And maybe this is, interesting for the listeners also. As a person, I'm an introvert, right? So I used to stutter when I was young, and so I went to I don't know the English word for it, but I went to speaking practice and whatnot, right? That would help me basically to stop with stuttering. And I think that sort of, pushed me to always do things out of my comfort zone. So I don't like, public speaking, but we met because I was public speaking somewhere in Amsterdam.
Exactly.
Right. And I
and I don't remember the topic, but I just remembered you as a person and that it was relevant. I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, appreciate it. This is something, at least that's my internal, sort of therapy, I would say, like nowadays, to still, push yourself to go, outside of your comfort zone and speak to people that seem to be out of reach. But actually, when you talk with them, like founders, right, and other executives, they're actually, really normal people. And I guess that's also why I really liked like the freelancing part, right? So I could engage with, decision makers and learn from them. So curious, right, to learn how they're building all these awesome, organizations. And then one day I actually got a call from a recruiter at Meta, at Facebook at the time, who said like, "Hey, we're looking for a very senior recruiter here who would like to help us to build, the Zurich office." And this was right around the whole privacy drama, right, around Facebook as well. So I was not super keen on listening to the offer, but then he said, "Yeah, but it's for Oculus." And I'm a huge nerd. I love everything that relates to tech, and Oculus are the AR VR headset. And so I immediately said yes. So I went to interview and whatnot, and absolutely had the time of my life at Facebook. I moved to Zurich, found a new partner in Zurich, got 2 kids in Switzerland.
Nice, congrats.
So thank you so much. So basically build a future here. And we talked about Facebook a little bit in the beginning. I think what was so awesome about the time at Facebook is that everything is so professional, right? So if I remember that presentation correctly that I did in Amsterdam at the time, we had videos, right, where there were demos in the presentation itself, like how the device looked like or how a recruiting process looked like. Everything is so sharp. It's like very well. It's like you're looking at like an Apple sort of presentation, right? And then on every aspect, so including also recruiting.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
And that was a super interesting time.
What was the thing that shaped you most, in maybe also from a talent acquisition perspective, or for you as a professional, when you were at Meta?
I think stakeholder relations because I often felt, at least in the beginning, and I think it was due to my experience at Booking, that specifically within TA, I think in Berlin at the time, it's way different now, but at the time, I think the level of recruiting in Berlin at the time was not so high, because if there was a recruiter that was interested in the field itself, this person would often move to HR, right? Would become an HR manager because the recruiting rules were not paying enough, or like it completely changed now, but back then. And so I always found recruiting more exciting. I found HR also cool, but I found recruiting just very exciting. And then I joined Meta, and then you are in the best in class, right? Everybody's really good. Everybody is really, really smart. So you're automatically very humbled, in your experience. And I think the added value that I brought is that I had a lot of experience in stakeholder management and talking to founders, so talking to really senior sort of profiles. And these were the
I think
that
especially the
after
time at Rocket Internet, right? There was just a high pace, high demanding environment. If you're not top of mind and manage the stakeholders, I think you're not really able to do this in a very standardized way where maybe this is comparable when you were at Rocket, because I think that was some the stakeholders also you mentioned, like Alex and Oliver, they are, I think, something what you don't see in any other organization, right?
No, absolutely.
So it's not a hiring manager to manage. It's just this person individually, and I think when you have this period and this time, this shapes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're trying to figure out, right, how you can, convince people and how you can find a sort of a compromise, right, that's basically good for both parties. And right, so I think that's one thing. And more technical, I guess, is the aspect of calibration. I actually think you had one, of your other guests on the show as well, who also worked at Facebook, before. And I think what Facebook is really big about is about interview calibration, right? And basically making sure that the interviewer experience is always similar, right? So that interviewers are basically trained, right, on the way how they ask questions, on the answers that they can expect, and that these answers are also ranked internally, right, of how good looks like, right? This is how, if the answer is something like this, then the candidate is likely going to be excellent. If the answer is like this, the candidate is likely going to be, not so good, or you might want to ask a follow-up question. And that's a practice I have not really seen anywhere else, where they have very extensive, question libraries, where hiring managers are really in control also of sort of the type of questions they want to ask, while not actively, participating in the recruiting process itself, right? They're there as a bar raiser, or, as someone basically to keep an eye on the process, but they're not often, the person that's going to interview that, the person on what is it, on personal ability or whatsoever. And that's, removing that bias from the interviewer side from a process was a real eye opener on how you can do really, really good interviews, for your company. And that's an experience that I basically took along to the other startups that I basically helped after, because, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make as a startup, and which one is also very expensive, is by hiring the wrong people, right? And specifically, if you're going to make those key hires in your second, third, or fourth wave of hiring, these hires are super, super expensive, if they go wrong. And what they do extremely well, I think, at least at Meta, is, trying to, minimize this error basically to a minimum. And so that, I guess, something else that's important.
Maybe let's jump a bit into the freelancer topic, because then you were a freelancer, then you were at Meta, but you were not a freelancer there, and then you get back into freelancing. And when I just look at your LinkedIn, you then directly went into a SVP role of Sennder, which is also not a small name, right? So I think Sennder is a hot company, also a unicorn, and they are doing a lot of things right. And I also know some people from there, so it's like that they really they professionalized while growing up, right? How did you end up there?
So the reason why I went back to freelancing, so I actually started my own company. So it's a GmbH, so it's not entirely freelancing, but I think the principle is the same. is because I think many large organizations that I worked for, so at Booking and at also at Meta, I often felt that I was it was hard for me, I think, to influence certain situations where at other startups it was more easy, for me. And I often felt that everybody wants you to do better, but not often better than themselves, right? And that's an environment that I find not great. And I felt that while getting more experience, I actually wanted to be that person that would want also people to be better than me, and helping them actually also to get there. So I also feel like if you think that you know things better, then you should probably just start your own company and figure it out yourself. So that's basically one of the reasons also why I moved back to starting my own company. And my first gig after Meta was with sennder. I actually started there first to help the team with doing TA, because I think there was already a good, I think, also functional team.
But how did you get the contract? Because I think that's for some freelancers really important and hard as well, and that's not a small contract. That's something which was
I mean, when I joined sennder, I think at the time, I need to say this correctly. When I joined sennder, I think they were with about 200 people, so it didn't have the size that they have now. I think now they're with 800 FTE or something. But at the time,
more than 1,000 even, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well, so at the time they were with about 200 folks, and I think I got there actually through through my network. I think it was Arnold. Right, so thank you, Arnold, for many things that you do for especially for the community, the recruiting community. But I think it was on I'm not entirely sure, but it was 100% through my own network. So I always.
But you also built that up front.
Yeah, I think a big also contributor, to that was my time, doing Rocket, because you meet so many founders and you meet so many new people. And yeah, I think it's going back to that sort of origin story, right? You have to try to put yourself into situations that are not so comfortable. And I do think that now it's probably
especially as an introvert,
easy.
right?
Yeah, especially as an introvert. And but I think now it's probably also a bit more easier because folks are more used to sort of digital communication, and this was before the whole COVID thing happened, right? So in-person work was probably even more appreciated, I think, than now. But back then, I think I already saw the power of networking, like how uncomfortable that might be, for many, right, including myself. So I think I built that network there. When I joined, Meta, I felt sometimes that I was losing that network. Was in another country, right, in Switzerland instead of Berlin, and that's also one of the things, I guess, that bothered me a bit about working at a larger org, right? You have a bit more restrictions often because of, PR, restrictions and legal restrictions, right? It's not so easy just to go out and do a presentation somewhere because you might say something, right, that might undermine the company. So also keeping a network in terms of visiting events and speaking at events, living in another country, I think made it like a bit more challenging. And that's why I'm so thankful actually, to people like Anna and also yourself, but also a few others that, you can also be distant friends, I guess is like a good word. But so maintaining that network and asking, I guess, also how somebody's doing every now and then, can really help you in, getting the extra mile somewhere.
Okay, and now overall in freelancing, what is your pattern in getting, let's say, these executive interim management deals? Because I think that's something what is not so easy. You need to be available first. You also need to be relevant enough, and then you also need to set the expectations in the right way that it's also rewarding for you, but also feasible for the company to hire you, right, in that way. Because a lot of companies are just opt out by default to it, say no, we all do everything internal, and to a lot of in many situations this totally makes sense, but in Vue it does not. And therefore I would like to get a bit of your understanding and your thinking.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there were a couple of ways on how I gathered, that network, right? So it was, by staying in touch with folks, and second, I think as a HR person, especially if you're a former recruiter, I think you have one superpower, and that's sourcing. And sourcing is very similar as to sales, at least like the pre-funnel cycle of sales, right? Where you do, lead generation, where you think about like the messages that you're going to send, like your multi-channel approach. And that's something that I spent an awful lot of, time on. Also, before we did the recording, I was just telling you about some things that I failed in, I believe, and massively, and also things that are seeming to go better. So, sort of applying that scale of identifying companies that sound exciting basically to work for, and then actually seeing if in your network you have any, sort of relations indirectly or maybe directly, with a particular, company, is probably like a first step where I would start also when you're thinking about, expanding your business. Yeah, and basically building that on top of the the existing network that you already have, right? There is also cold outreach, right? Obviously, and I actually kind of forgot who said this, but there was a LinkedIn post actually that I saw recently of a person that said, and this is not just for for freelancing, but I think for applying in general, who said 30% of your time you should actually spend on sort of applying for jobs. The other 30% you should actually spend on using your network, and the other 40% you should probably just spend on cold outreach and making sure you build maybe a pitch deck for yourself that showcases the impact also that you had in the past. Maybe you have some exciting numbers, right? That you can share of like befores and afters, and then it will stick. But yeah, it needs to be personalized. It's also a bit of a numbers game, and yeah, and that's that's my experience, I would say.
And what are your top learnings and challenges you overcome as an interim manager freelancer?
Yeah, I mean, I think like from like the sales part, I think sales and recruiting and also in HR is incredibly hard, right? I think you are very dependent still on economical cycles. We are all part of this FIFO principle, right? First in, first out. That's sadly specifically within recruiting how things work, and that's also well reflected, I think, in your sales cycle. So if I look at my own efforts, November, December was pretty dramatic, and now we're going into February, and it's suddenly looking actually really good, right? So that's just different.
In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
So that's one sort of challenge I think that I found.
And to overcome it, we discussed it, it's more the network, right? That it's more strategic, long-term, checking in with people, giving updates, and just making sure that you have certain level of trust all the time.
Yeah.
And then there is some critical event that is offering up an opportunity, and then you should be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also being patient, right? I'm personally, I'm a pretty impatient, person. And I would rather already like to ask this person, like, hey, why don't we jump on a coffee? But yeah, I mean, it's likely that person on the other line, on the other side of the screen, doesn't have the same, personality maybe that you have. So it's better indeed sometimes just to wait a couple of days and, let the message actually sink in, or build a relationship first before you're going for the, kill, basically. So yeah, that's absolutely a lesson. I think another one is, it's like, we already discussed, I'm a bit of an introvert, and I think specifically COVID is at the time really took me a huge step back. I think COVID made me even more of an introvert maybe than I already was, because there were no events. And I remember very well that that there was an event in Berlin. Again, I think it was an event from Anna. I think actually for her portfolio companies. And I remember I was going into the elevator, and I was pinging my girlfriend, and I said, I've never been at an event for the last 2 years. I don't know what to do. Right. But yeah, anyway, the doors opened and then I already forgot that I sent this basically. So I found it actually quite challenging, to get back into this rhythm of, sort of connecting and really getting yourself out there. And, what can really ground you if there are other people that are going through a similar experience is that the more effort you're going to put into something, the more likely it will have an impact. And along the way, you can look at your funnel and you will tweak it, you will improve it, you will get much better at what you did. But it really starts with, sort of putting energy in it, executing, stop with, also strategizing all the time, just go do it. And,
exactly. And I think this is a principle that you need to use the advantages of the probabilities for yourself, right? So that would mean that there is a relevant person out there organizing a relevant event, most probably. Then you just go there and you have nothing to lose, right? Because you have not been there anyway already. If you so why not going there, right? And then if you're there, just talking to people, and as you said, just being open to it, going with the flow, and just be lucky and increase the probability to become lucky, to just be positive, have a positive feeling about it, frame it in a positive way, make sure that you're just aware of what you may want to get out of it, and then just act like that. And then I think it comes to you sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe a last challenge, and I think that's like a consideration for I think for anyone, to make that is still in the interim business or is, considering, to go into this business. Sales is going to be part of your work, if you like it or not. And I think you might come at the stage where you're like, hey, I'm really sick and tired of doing the networking because I got a family or I got other things to do that I find more important. That's really something that you need to keep in mind, because if you won't do your sales on top of doing your job also does really, really well, because that sells automatically, you're going to have a tough time, because there will be months, there will be years for great economic opportunity, and there are ones that are not so good, for example, now, right? And so that's really something that you need to, keep in the back of your head. And then more like from a, in-person experience, from the in-company experience, as an interim person, it means that you will need to leave, right, at some point. And the company might be super exciting. And I guess that's it. Yeah, you need to leave. And what that sometimes also means is that you won't be able to see the entire cycle, basically, right, of that strategy that you thought of or, that you implemented. And I've also been in situations where I was actually talking to a client who was considering to hire an interim person. It was the first question that he asked. I said, look, you've rarely worked somewhere for 4 years, right? So how do you know if a strategy actually plays out? And that's a fair question, right? And so, yeah, I think that's something that you would need to consider when you are, moving into like an interim role.
Cool. I think we don't have time for another topic like social engineering in talent acquisition, but maybe we can do another episode on this, because I like to keep it 30 minutes.
Sure.
Leslie, thank you so much for your time, and
let's
maybe schedule another one on social engineering, because I think that's a very interesting piece, and you saw a lot from it already, and we can do this in the next episode. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.